Well, we would just replace the existing poles, but if you add poles into it, it makes that sign about $150 intact.
Yes, Mr. Montier. Sorry, I was still reading.
To clarify, I don't believe that we only charge for parking from May through October, is that correct?
April.
Or September?
Through
May through
September.
September.
April through September.
April through September, okay, I think we need to be very clear on that.
Correct,
Okay, April through September, outside of those months, it's no parking fee.
correct.
Okay.
Something that you all have actually taken action on is something that we'll be bringing back to council to take action on. In addition, one of the things he mentioned in this report was adding a bag to cover our meters in the off season, and we did speak with Flowbird about that about a week or so ago. And she did give us some companies who has the appropriate bags and not cover the solar panel, because if we cover the solar panel, then we run into issues with the meters. So we'll be following up on that. We do not have a cost on that yet, but we do know we have 14 meters to cover. So whatever the bag cost will be, times 14.
Can they say, come back next summer? Something friendly.
Can we put the adjustment of those dates on the short list, because obviously it dramatically impacts us fall?
Yes.
Okay, any other, and I just wanted to ask a question about the decals. So you said we were working to eliminate decals. Are we working to eliminate decals or just restructure it and bill it with personal property tax?
Not eliminate the decal, but you still still pay the fee.
Yeah, but I think there's been some question about the fact that sticker may still be necessary and you just pick one up.
So the goal would be to get rid of the physical decal / sticker,
okay.
whatever we want to call it, completely, so that he being Chief Deaver and the police have the ability with their license plate reader to read the licenses to see who has obviously technically a decal.
Okay, and we would just need decals for golf carts
Correct.
because that requires them to get an inspection.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, all right, thanks. I didn't want to go too far down the decal path. I know that's a kind of separate subject. Just wanted clarification. Okay.
Do you have what you need, Ms. Manager?
Their direction. So thank you all for that. I'll be moving.
All right, next is discussion regarding public beaches and all accessory things and follow-up and dogs and grills and
Yeah, a lot of things.
traffic and,
I wanted council to discuss the impact of the season on our town and try to get some clear understanding. Do we have a plan to address some of these issues? And when residents have a problem, who should they call? Right now, they're calling the non-emergency number, which goes to dispatch, which then gets patched back through to the local police, who may or may not show up depending on who's on duty and what else is going on in the town. But some of the situations are really safety. They're directly related to safety. So visitors are parking on Irving Avenue on both right-of-ways, on both sides of Irving Avenue. They are straddling ditches and parking in front of residents' homes where there is no parking spaces marked. They are parking on the other side. You go on further down Irving Avenue and they're parking on the riverside facing the direction that traffic flows down there. And there's not enough room for two cars to pass. There are the ice cream vendor, and I don't know which one, I don't know how many we have, is stopping in a traffic lane and sometimes not even off on the side so that the trolley can't get past.
you're
Large
not telling
trucks.
me anything I don't know.
No, I'm not talking, I'm just, some of the things that have been reported, they're parking on both sides of North Irving Avenue which there is only parking, I think, on the left side of North Irving Avenue. And when they do that, it's impossible for vehicles to get down that street, even though it's a one-way street between there. The parking at the end of Colonial and turning around. I had one of our lovely residents was walking her dog down there and a car pulled up and parked. And she very politely said, this is not, there's no parking here. And also there's no dogs allowed on the boardwalk or the beach. And the person said, thank you for letting me know, and got out of her car and took her dog down the beach, right there at the end of Colonial Avenue, which is about as obvious as you could get. So I think a lot of the issues are enforcement issues. And again, the signage, we have to have the signage up for the, say no parking on this side of the street consistently. And there are signs there. And I don't want them every 10 feet like was done once before, because it's just ugly and insane. But so that we can enforce either by ticketing or towing. I mean, a lot of small towns, you park in the wrong place, there's a tow truck that's going to be there to tow you away. I mean, they're contracted by the towns or by the university. I see this a lot at universities, that if you're parked in a no parking zone, there's no warning or anything. Sign says if you park here, you'll be towed, and your vehicle is towed. And then the people have to deal with that, and they don't tend to do it twice.
All right, I'll let Mr. Moncur.
Yeah, let him jump in.
Well, I'm sure you all remember that initial memo I sent you with regard to ordinances that needed to be adjusted immediately. This was one of them. I'm sure you've read that in great detail, but we need to get the ordinance straightened out first, period, the end. Then we can enforce. But until we redo the ordinance, it's all hypothetical.
Well, let's do that. What do we have to do that?
You and Tom can work together on the ordinance and bring it back in July.
Is this one ordinance? Which ordinance is this?
You may be amazed to hear that I don't remember the details of my own memo. I'm sorry, it's old age. But parking was one of those issues that needed to be addressed, and we just need to address it.
I think we were just waiting to get the parking study back, and now we have it. So I don't think there's any more hesitation on that. So if you guys want to work forward on the ordinance, that would be fantastic. I love it. Yes.
I got a question for Chief Deaver. How many extra people do you need to enforce all this parking stuff?
Monday, we had, including myself, 4 officers walking the boardwalk, addressing some of these concerns, one of them being the boat that was tied to the town pier, and some other parking concerns and other violations of town ordinance. And that was for about 4 hours, which means there was no enforcement in any other part of the town. Unless they were called to a call in that area, and they had to walk back to their vehicles and get there. So the total number, I can't give you a quantified number, but it would be drastically more than what the town employs.
That's what I thought.
And then enforcement of parking ordinances circles back again to signage. So we're stuck on the horns of that dilemma as well. Until we get the ordinance done, the signage done, we're not going to be able to enforce it.
So I propose we make a plan, and then we could move forward with the plan. What are the steps for that plan?
I think that the plan is to get somebody on board, which we've already authorized is the July 1 fiscal year. So yes, one part-time person for
One
the
part-time
summer,
person.
correct?
Yes.
That's one more than you had before.
That is correct.
And we know the sign's working on ordinance. There's some interest in working on the ordinance. I think it sounds like that's good. And I think the
So
key thing that was mentioned was, who do they go to contact? And I love that question, because let's make sure that's very clear. Let's make sure it's clear to us, to beach ambassadors, to law enforcement. Who are they going to come to with questions? They're going to come up to any one of us. They're going to come up to any beach ambassador. They're going to come up to any town employee that they happen to see that they know comes around, like picking up their trash or things like that. And, make sure that there's a clear point of contact on who who to contact. Obviously, in certain instances, you need to contact the police.
So what I'm hearing Tom say is that we
Excuse me.
don't have the ordinance in place in order to be able to enforce the parking. Is that what you're saying?
It's somewhat dated, to put it charitably, and you would need the ordinance updated. You would also need the signage to accompany that ordinance so that you can enforce it. It takes both. Right, chief?
That's correct.
Are
When
we
you go-
beyond our capacity? Are we getting ourselves beyond our capacity downtown? In other words, is that the issue? Is it getting beyond control?
On Monday afternoon, we were way beyond capacity the beach goers are coming, they're parked on private property, they're parked on right of way, they're parked on town property where there is no parking. I mean, what are you gonna do? Put up a gate and when you get to a
That's,
certain rate?
and we haven't even thought of a way that we can handle it.
But it's not
Maybe
every
somehow or another we
weekend.
have to handle it. I don't know.
I mean, hopefully it's not every weekend. This was an exceptional weekend. but-
Well, the
but-
weather
but-
capitalized that too, because Memorial Day notably for years and years and years has been a washout. And so this was perfect Memorial Day weekend. It was warm enough to go to the beach, warm enough in the water, because I did go swimming with my kids.
And you have Riverfest coming.
And we do have Riverfest coming, although you know, and I know that is not traditionally drawn the kind of crowd that a federal holiday weekend does. But we have Juneteenth this weekend, which is federal, 2
No,
weeks,
2 weeks.
3 weeks.
It's on the
So that will be
18th,
another
yeah.
federal holiday off, which will grow in that sense. And then, of course, July 4th is always mayhem.
We are at this point beyond capacity and out of control. That's the easy answer. It's a question of how we reel it back and get it under control. I think it's going to take it's going to take ordinance and signage to do it. And we just need to.
I can't highlight enough to keep the rules simple. The signs that I've seen for the beach are phenomenal because it's like 5 no's. And not to be super negative, but keep it simple because the more and more complicated we get in these regulations, the more complicated they get to enforce, the more complicated they get to explain to people. And that is very time consuming and burden. I don't know what that noise is. I think Heather's trying to fix it.
Well, I think I've circulated my display of signs in this town, the 12 or 15 that we've got that are absolutely designed to confuse people, and we're doing a remarkably fine job of it. So we need to simplify it. We need to make it knock down the numbers.
Yeah.
And make them work.
If I may follow up, with respect to the ordinance discussion, because your very first ordinance with respect to parking is pretty broad and grants the authority to the town manager, following, of course, your direction. If you get your signs up, to Mr. Moncure's point, because you do need that for successful enforcement and prosecution, with the designated areas, because your first ordinance is broad enough to grant the authority that you need, you would be fine, I think, this year. You just need to make sure your locations are clearly marked and clearly limited or restricted as to access if need be. But the main thing is marked. You should be okay. That's a long way of saying you should be okay. Mr. Moncure's right. These ordinances do need to be updated and fixed. But as far as like standing up to scrutiny, you should be okay if you have, to Mr. Moncure's point, the proper signage. So that's probably if that could be on your list.
Which it's been improved already from last year. I don't know if you remember, but last year was worse than, some of those Flowbird signs are new and put up that I've seen already this year. Or at least repositioned that I noticed them now. I clearly see them now. And we have the billboards.
Will we have standards that we go for as far as enforcement and the distance between and and I'm sure we will come up with the designated signage, so that it's enforceable. And we'd also need to know how far between
That's
signs
recommended in the parking study.
in that one.
Oh.
So legal, I'm just saying legally enforceable. This, if the parking study says that it's legally enforceable, that I kind of want to check with our town's attorney also. Make sure
I mean,
she
if you have a
confirms.
sign that says no parking on this side of the street, they don't have to be every 10 feet. Right?
That's what I'm getting at. How far apart do they have to be?
Unfortunately, the more the better, but
Well, the more the better,
Yeah.
but if you can see a sign from where you're parking that says the P with the no through it, is that good enough to give a ticket and get a conviction?
Give a ticket, yes, conviction is gonna be based on the location and how they parked and orientation to that sign, time of day, is there a light on the sign so they can see it after dark? All these things are going into play for conviction if they do not prepay the ticket.
Ticketing
Push
is
ticket
one
at work.
thing. Most of these people, if you ask them to move, they move.
That's not the report I'm getting from residents.
You mean people parked on the side streets and stuff like that? I guess I'm thinking more of like somebody that's parked awkwardly at angles down here. I've seen some craziness happen down here. But somebody has to be there to tell them to move. That's the other problem. They get on the beach and then they can't. Yeah, that's right.
I was just gonna note, when I went on vacation last year to Savannah, Georgia and Tybee Island, every spot's marked with a number, so when you get there that you have to pay for parking. I thought that was a great way. I mean, because here it's confusing as heck. I wouldn't know what to do if I came into town with the way we have it marked. I don't know if anything like that would work with Flowbird, but anything indicate that it's paid parking would definitely.
Well, we
help.
could still number them and who cares if you use it for the Flowbird app or not. But, Cause I hope you find your car again.
I don't know, I feel like we have talked around this in circles, and I just would like to see us come up with a plan that we can say to the citizens, we're going to get no parking signs up where parking is not allowed. We're gonna get parking signs up where parking is allowed with instructions. And if somebody parks in front of my house on the right of way, the town right of way, there's somebody I can call that will send somebody out that will tell them to move if they don't move when I ask them politely. Is that possible?
that actually might require an ordinance amendment because I'm not seeing it in the ordinance that, on town rights of way, that there's no parking. It's not one of the designated no parking places.
And if there's a sign there that says no parking on this side of the street, it has to be in the ordinance too?
It should be, it doesn't have to be. But that, I'm not sure that those areas, those designated prohibited areas have been identified, and I don't know. I'm
Right,
new to this.
Until there's a draft language for what needs to be addressed in the parking ordinance, I don't want to go through this right now in this moment. I think that's kind of pointless. So let's work on the parking ordinance from here on. I'm honestly exhausted of talking about the fact of there will be signs. So I sure hope they show up soon.
And just to frame that discussion, Madam Mayor, when you do have it, not every prohibited area has to be in the ordinance, but it either has to be in the ordinance or it has to be in a plan, if you will, that the manager, according to the language of your ordinance as it is now, that your manager stamps as approved or directs to enforce. So it can be either place. Not everything has to be listed in the ordinance, and sometimes it's better to utilize the flexibility of plans, if you will.
I mean, would it be oversimplifying to do an ordinance that said parking was allowed in designated areas only? Or,
I
mean,
think
is
those
it-
are questions, Karen, that we're gonna spend another 2 hours talking about and not getting to the rest.
I
of
know,
our
I just feel like
agenda.
we've been talking about it for a year and a half, and I'd like to see some movement forward.
So I think we need to bring together some draft language that we can actually take a motion and action on. Sound good, Tom?
I love it when Tom and I agree.
I'm gonna move forward in our meeting. Or I might take a 10-minute break. We've been sitting here for a while. Do you guys want a break?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break. Let's go ahead. Heather, you good? Okay, I'm gonna call it back to order now at 6:40, or 6:40, 8:40. 8:40. Adopt a park, Mr. Duke.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. This will be quick, hopefully. About a year ago, a little less than a year ago, I was at an Alliance meeting, and a couple of our wonderful civic and NGO members had expressed an interest in adopting a park. We went through several discussions about how that would work, up to including MOUs that kind of got us into the weeds. And we think we've come up with a rather simple solution to allowing those folks to help out. I think it's timely based on some of the conversations we've had, obviously tonight, about the amount of trash that was generated over some of these weekends. And I think this would present an opportunity for, again, the volunteer organizations to adopt a park, green space, to help pick up trash on occasion. So we came up with an Adopt a Park program application. I'm confident in saying that it's something that would be beneficial to all of us and would probably be taken care of rather quickly, as we've had, again, civic organizations and NGOs express an interest in doing this. I solicited feedback from Ms. Adams Jacobs, as well as the town attorney, and the Adopt a Park program application seems to be in order there. Adopting a park would be obviously limited in scope to simply helping us keep and maintain the parks. There will not be any signage, for example, allowed to be placed by the sponsoring organization. We would certainly give them kudos in social media and in public settings, but it would be limited to, again, cleaning up the parks on occasion and making public works via work order or work request if something is broken or malfunctioning. So with that, I would hope that you folks would agree to that.
Questions? Yes, Ms. Williams?
Are there any liability issues with allowing volunteers to do maintenance in our parks?
Well, that's why we would insist that the organizations that do apply, and if they're eventually approved, we would make it clear that there would be no maintenance allowed. Those types of requests would have to be made through Public Works, through the work order system that we currently have. We don't want anybody getting hurt.
Well, I was talking
Obviously.
about, you said trash and stuff like, well, I consider that kind of maintenance, like taking care of
Correct.
mowing or anything like that. Would they be doing any of that kind of stuff?
I would have to ask the town attorney to address that part of it, but just from what I've understood, if we have volunteers, for example, working at a Parks and Rec event, I think they would be covered for liability under the town's insurance policy.
Insurance, yes. Generally, yes, that you have liability on your publicly owned properties, and that I've checked into that before, and generally speaking, any visitors in whatever capacity are covered.
Excuse
Thank
me.
you.
And we checked on this last year, when we were doing the beach ambassadors and things like that in the park attendants. Any volunteers who were working on town property would be covered under our general liability insurance.
Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, if,
Mr. Allison?
I would make a motion that
Are you
we,
gonna make the- Go ahead.
I would make a motion that we approve the Adopt a Park program as presented by Mr. Duke.
I'd second it, since I was gonna make the motion.
That is what you were gonna do. I wasn't sure.
I'm trying.
Okay. It's open for discussion. Okay,
Would there be any kind of coordination needed with Public Works? I know you said something about work orders and stuff like that, but like, say, for example, the organization was gonna pick up trash that weekend. We wouldn't want Public Works driving out there to pick up trash and not having to deal with it. For example.
That's a good point. I actually think we could probably work something like that at the administrative level to give those folks the heads up that those types of things were gonna happen. The conversations I've had, these organizations would probably do it once a month or once every couple of weeks. And we could certainly make all parties involved aware of that. The ones that I've, again, spoken to have also said that they would dispose of any trash that they find at the proper locations.
I believe that a lot of citizens are doing this voluntarily with their informal agreement now. They go to the parks and they pick up the trash they see and they put it in the existing trash cans, or they take it away if it's too much. I think this is just formalizing the program so that an NGO can, or a civic organization can take credit and say, hey, we take care of Washington Avenue Park. You know, that's something they can
Like
be
the
proud
Adopt a
of.
Highway program
Yeah.
would be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is make sure that whatever the Adopt a Park civic organization is, the duties that they say that they're gonna do, that we follow up with them to make sure that they're actually doing it. So if say they're gonna go pick up the trash and they're not picking up the trash, then we need to make sure that we're covering that as well. Because at that point, we would need Public Works to then follow up and do the work that the Adopt a Park people were supposed to be doing, so.
Thank you, Councilman. I think, I would agree, and I think that I would echo the sentiments of Dr. Seth Sullivan, in that much of this work is already being performed by the wonderful volunteers who do that. And I think, again, this is, again, echoing her statements, it's probably just a more formal way of letting the general public know that they're doing it, and we should give them kudos as we always do, but also it may help them find more volunteers who are passionate about that sort of thing.
Has this gone through the Parks and Rec Commission meetings already?
Not in this iteration, Madam Mayor, but we have had many, many conversations about adopting this sort of thing. I think what happened initially is we kind of got bogged down in the coming up with an individual MOU or MOA with every single organization that wanted to do it. And I think this probably streamlines that entire process. But I think I'm comfortable in saying that all the members have been very supportive of this type of effort.
Yeah, so there have been several discussions on the Adopt a Park program. But like Bobby said, a lot of the Parks and Rec stuff recently was trying to get the soccer program going, the movie night. So there were activities that were more focused on than this, but I believe the general consensus of all the individuals was absolutely to do this. Yes, ma'am.
I see we have a Parks and Rec member back there, so thumbs up? Yep. Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Resolution 2522, town manager to enter contract negotiations for town hall needs analysis. Ms. Adams Jacobs.
Small purchases.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on the wrong page. Look, I checked off that one. I didn't have a motion second or anything on that other one, I guess. Okay, that's why. I apologize. Small purchase procedures policy.
So I was asked to look or to propose an updated small purchase procedures policy. And if I may speak very generally to begin with, the draft that you have in front of you includes limits that are very high. And these are the state limits. And let me, in very general sense, also clarify one distinction. Your small purchase policy, the purpose of it is to ensure compliance with the Virginia Public Procurement Act. You can overlay onto that, and most people do, a local policy that says, okay, once you're in compliance with the Virginia Public Procurement Act, we, local governing body, town council in this instance, we want to see and approve anything above a certain amount. And I make that distinction because oftentimes the two get blended, and it makes it very, very difficult to move forward and to get purchases, get contracts, get bids. I frequently use an example that I had, which was because of the limits that were in an old purchasing policy in a locality that I used to work in, every single sheriff's vehicle even it had to be bought. It had to be an RFP or state contract. But my sheriff was adamant that he could get better prices, and he did. But it had to get RFP. So we upped the limit because of to comply with the Virginia Public Procurement Act. Even regardless of what limit you choose, and I would encourage you to choose for your purchasing policy higher, to go higher, because that gives you flexibility. No matter what number you as the local governing body want to see as far as approval of every policy, that gives you more flexibility about how you get there. In other words, just because you want to approve every contract, and I'm just going to use an example, $50,000 or more, that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to say every contract at $50,000 or more has to have an RFP. You could say 3 bids are fine up to, I don't know, $100,000 or $250,000. The state limit is $200,000. So that's where I started, because it's easier to bring that down. But the numbers I gave you, well, at the top end is $200,000. But again, that gives you more flexibility to make sure that, or to ensure that you're getting bids, because in small localities, and I really did that too, and I point that out, because that difficulty, Fairfax County doesn't have that difficulty. But small localities do have difficulty oftentimes in getting people to bid. So whatever number you choose, it doesn't matter. I'm just cautioning you, it's okay. And I would probably encourage you to set your limits a little bit higher than what you might feel comfortable with, because don't confuse the two. In other words, set your limits high as to what you have to do to meet state law, but then whatever you feel comfortable with as far as having things come to you for approval, that's fine. That's like an overlay.
Mr. Manager?
If I may characterize, what you've got before us puts us in compliance with the Procurement Act. But I note in your summary that there's a requirement for us to come up with a separate policy in terms of the parameters as you just described. So it would seem to me the devil in the details really is the policy underlying this.
That's where you really overlay your control about what you want to see come before council each time, or what you will administratively designate. That overlay, that policy overlay, yes, is where you maintain your control. And some localities also rein in the small purchase policy limits, under the Public Procurement Act. I just caution you against bringing them down too low, because it really makes purchasing difficult, especially in smaller localities. And this is just setting, just so you're compliant is really what it is.
Well, a good example of that was the town pier needing to be fixed, and the timeliness of having to get somebody, get supplies, and move and act on that. And so, I mean, that's kind of one that just comes to mind.
Ron?
Yes, Mr. Montier.
What I think would be appropriate in a policy would be appropriate delegation of authority, town manager on down, appropriate accounting procedures, which apparently are absent. And I'd also like to see a policy that would require certain levels of procurement that the people doing it would file statements of economic interest. And I think all those are, that's the kind of thing I think we need in a policy. And again, what you've got here is fine, but it's the framework that really will drive the policy.
Yes, and that was the intent, was to give you the sort of the upper end, and then you can bring it in with details as you deem appropriate. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Williams.
So is the proposal to pass this now and then come up with the details, or come up with the details as Tom described and then pass this? What's the-
That would be my suggestion unless I'm not aware of an immediate pressing need. I don't think there is, because you do have a small purchase policy. The numbers are just very low. And so it's very difficult to get things done. So I think there's a desire to get something done. But I don't think if you were to let this simmer maybe for until your next meeting or maybe one more after that, and then and give staff some guidance about what you might feel comfortable with those numbers being, and the policy overlay that Mr. Monkier is describing, I think you would be okay waiting a couple weeks or to a month. There's nothing that I'm aware of that's
I thought-
overly imminent.
Didn't Nate just send us out a new, or did India send us out a new?
That's the old.
Oh,
He
that's
sent
the old
out,
one.
he did send out the
Resolution 40.
the old one. I think one of the things that I was tasked with was looking at some policies and procedures that we need updated. We know ordinances. Within the last year, I know there's been some delays in projects simply because some of the additional burdens that we put on ourselves as a locality and as a small locality. There's only a few staff, so more often than not, it's me, Rob, JC, Nate, Lisa on every procurement, as we buy more things, as we do more studies, there's more RFPs, there's more red tape for everything. So as we have more projects, any way that we can simplify some processes for things simply like signage that are under $10,000 that we then have to get weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks to get quotes for something that is relatively minute, drives along processes that take much longer. We also, I will say, sent both Nisha and JC to get procurement training through their VCA, and they looked at our procurement policy and said that some things are just simply outdated as it relates to verbal quotes, because you really are relying on someone's integrity and honor to give you specifics on verbal quotes, just simple things like that. So once Vivian took a look at it, I asked her to pick up the ball based on what they learned in their VCA training at the state through procurement, and in any way we can be in uniformity with the state on their procurement policies and let state contracts like Chief Beaver has, and working with Lisa, it makes it really simpler for our audit process and for our finance team, and for me as the purchasing agent on top of my many other roles for the town.
Okay, so I think we should defer action on this though to the next meeting when council members have had a chance to ask more questions too in our finance department, and make sure there's a robust understanding of that. That's okay, everybody?
I'd like to see some suggestions too, like what you think the limit should be and stuff like that, to replace 4310, the 2010 version of what we're talking about.
Okay. Moving forward then. Yes. Okay. So now this one is contract negotiations for town hall needs analysis. Am I back on track now? Okay, thank you. Why do I have a tab S?
I'm running out of tabs.
I
I need my tabs back.
was like, yes, that is,
Please.
I know you're talking to me, it's fine.
So one of the items on our strategic action plan is a town hall space needs analysis. We have put this out to RFP and have a respondent who we're looking to move forward with. So this resolution would grant town council, grant me the opportunity and the approval to enter into a contract to proceed with this project for town hall needs analysis. As you know, we are currently in our current space, which throughout some of this RFP process we learned has several issues, on top of the fact that our police department is in a lease space that is, which lease is up. The lease is up next year, and we're currently spending about $42,000 annually on that lease at the bank building. So this specific resolution would authorize me to enter into a contract with Glavian Homes Architecture, which was the top respondent, to proceed with the space needs analysis.
Is this limited to town hall, or does this include emergency services?
This would include our police department in terms of our emergency services within the scope.
And is it any way that we could have to look at how an EMS team could be incorporated?
If that is the desire of council, it may then take this negotiation above 50,000, but if that's something council would like to discuss, and we could potentially go back to the firm to take a look at that.
Mr. Montague?
If we were in the most ideal of all possible worlds, I would say it would be a good idea. But it appears that the rescue squad is moving, if not expeditiously, moving along in terms of relocating to 700 Colonial as a separate facility. And with the idea that if we can move them along and we free up parking where they are now, throwing another wrench in this would probably put us back longer than we want to get put back. Again, in the ideal of all possible worlds, yes. But I think in terms of accomplishing something, we need to go ahead and move with this one.
So I have heard that there's some problems with 700 and building the facility that we need to build related to the compaction and the stuff that's buried under that property. And
We met with the architect and there's no issue.
is everybody in agreement on that?
Rob is more of an expert in this arena, so I would defer to our Director of Public Works to.
I was informed that the architect or designer feels there are no issues in relation to the subgrade, and he was given the data that was collected.
So I know there were some concerns raised. Can you tell us about those concerns and why it was even brought up?
Well, it's a lot of fill and whether the concerns would hold the structure. And there's a lot of fill in that particular area. But the designer did make the statement that he saw no problem with it.
It's a fairly lightweight building. We're not putting a high rise on it, and the footer structure for that kind of soil is pretty standard. And I think that was getting a little overly concerned about a soil study without having the.
Yeah, and the other side of that is we know that our volunteer rescue squad has been threatened by decertification, and that they're working really hard and recruiting really hard and having new standards met. Are there any advantages to having them located within a town facility that includes the police department, the rescue squad, town hall? Are there any advantages to help us
I don't think so.
maintain that?
And the reason why I'm gonna respond to that is because they would still be on town-owned property. So whether we try to co-locate all these services, which ultimately then is going to force our hand in taking over the responsibility that currently lies with the county on emergency services. Unless you'd like to raise taxes here to pay for a full EMS service, which I don't, the goal of saving the rescue squad was to continue that service with them. Their property would still be on town-owned property.
So Madam Mayor, with all due respect, all I'm asking is that while we're doing this space needs analysis, that they be considered in the process instead of just limiting it to the police and the town hall.
I'm with Tom. I think it just would delay things. And I think ultimately building the facility at 700 with no matter what unforeseeable outcome could come in our future is a positive for this town and could be used in multi-purpose ways.
And let me, we're losing Wilder next year for parking.
Right.
So we are desperate for parking spaces, and the quicker we can move the rescue squad, the better.
So what's the time frame on their current plan? When can they be in a new building? I mean, if we're doing this, if that's the reason we're doing it, I would like to know what that projected time
Hopefully it'll be
frame is.
quicker than getting parking, the signage straightened out. No. And the reason I'm joking is that we've sat in on meetings with the rescue squad. I think they are moving in good faith. It's probably going to be a couple of months before we can really ratchet that down.
We're
But
gonna, I I think we're gonna plan to have a public hearing in July for them. Because they will require that as part of their funding from the USDA. They are already in that application process. And that the leases language is getting sorted out right now, and that will also be on that public hearing in July. And then they will know about funding for that come this fall. So as early as this fall, construction could begin. That's being optimistic, but they are showing, diligent.
It's within the realm of possibility that they could be gone by next summer. That's the easy answer.
Possibility or probability?
It's,
Again, we don't live in the ideal, most possible, they're not in the most ideal of all possible worlds.
So I'm not sure if you were directing the question to me, but from an EMS perspective, there would obviously be some pros to having everything on one location as it relates to emergency operations centers, and there potentially could be some grant funding for that. But the rescue squad has moved forward at the 700 Colonial Avenue, and I've been working as part of that team with Mr. Murphy as well. So that is, if there was a pro, that would be one of the main pros, if that was a consideration.
I still feel like we should consider that in the space needs analysis. I don't know what the harm is in that being a part of the consideration when we look at our space needs.
I think it sends a messaging to the rescue squad that right now has been put a lot of effort and work into this, and we've, had this.
I think it sends a message to them to go ahead. If you're going to do this, let's get it done. If you can't get it done, then we have considered it, and before we go investing in a new municipal center.
I think you're gonna find that adding that facility makes the entire municipal center enormous.
Well, that's why we do the space needs analysis.
It's really.
Yes, before we agree to spend this $30,000 to $50,000, what are the odds that we can actually even pay for a new facility? I mean, we just had to raise taxes in order to pay for the bare minimum. I mean, we're talking, I'm guessing, close to $1 million at least, right?
So future financing would have to be identified more than likely through debt. For a new facility, typically most buildings of this nature would be issued. You're talking about a useful life of 40, 50 plus years for a loan of this type. There are potentially loans that we can go after, as well as grants that we can go after for public facilities, not too different from what the rescue squad is looking after as well.
I think the lease agreement we're paying for the police department at $47,000 a year is something that I'd certainly rather be spending on a built physical structure that we own. And it's only gonna go up. It's only gonna go up, and if you think that lease coming up isn't gonna make it go up again, right, it is a lot of money. I think another form is what to include in another question is what to include in the spatial needs analysis, because there's been a lot of questions about that, about how, what I hear from staff around, the water cooler is we don't have enough space as it is now to perform operations because of the way the layout the school is that everybody works in these sort of classroom settings, and private conversations can't happen or work focus. I know Miss Debbie's not with us, right? And not with the town staff anymore, but she had a lot of issues focusing on test taking while people were coming in and out of the office constantly and disruptions. So I don't know, what are some of the staff needs or concerns around, and what would improve?
So specifically, there were things mentioned. Sorry, the mic is going in and out. In some of the drafts that we got back from our respondents to the RFP, that really highlighted some of the deficiencies of our building, since it was an elementary school. going back to the safety concerns at the Freddy Krueger room, it's known as the Freddy Krueger room, which is really just a furnace and some maintenance area. Some of the ADA compliance issues, which we have tried to mitigate, but there are still ADA compliance issues with our building as is. Our finance director is in an open space with 4 other staff people with no office and no door, which when we talk about focus and being able to actually work on your job, you're talking about test taking, which is very important. But when we're talking about managing millions of dollars, there's some specific areas and functions that just have no privacy. HR, for instance, is one. Most localities have rooms for expectant mothers, lactation rooms. That's something that most localities have to provide in some way, some space for that. PD has its own separate ADA issues. We have multiple functions working out of different spaces, and we have some staff just hoteling in certain areas on certain days because there simply is no permanent space. Mr. Duke started out in 700 Colonial, which had really no Wi-Fi access, horrible working bathroom, so we pulled him into the clerk's office. But for a functioning clerk / counsel / HR at the time / public or Parks and Rec office, there were a lot of functions. So that's just to name a few. Electric issues, we frequently have some outages in town hall as it relates in power based on the amount of staff that we have pulling down electricity to some of these spaces. So we're looking at doing what we can to kind of right size what we have right now in terms of changing around configurations of our conference room. There's really no meeting space if you want to have a meeting for more than 10 people. That's not also our break room / also where our auditors are doing audit work right now. So it's really, in a lot of ways, not
HVAC.
functional.
HVAC too, atrocious.
It's window units. What do you mean? What HVAC?
Window units, and you got oil heat, which is talking about eating us alive right now. It's very old.
You were in your 20s when you're in there? I love hearing these stories. It's my favorite part of the day. Okay. Thank you for reminding us. Do you want action on this now? Or at the next council meeting? Now. Vicky says now. Is that a motion, Vicky? All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, any further discussion?
Just
Yeah.
one last question. Where are we getting the money from? Is it already in our budget, some specific budget, or?
It's been identified in our CIP in the previous year as well as this year, Fund 330.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we got the money, we got the plan. I'll be interested to see what comes back out of it, to be honest with you. Are we gonna host a DMV? Social services? Once
A flex space option would be included in a potential design.
that would be wonderful. Okay. All right,
Yeah, keep in mind that my kids went to school there and they're now in their, almost 30 years old. So it's small. The bathrooms, I'm sure, are built for little
they're
kids.
kitty size.
And the security was for back in the 80s. There's no security for now.
Yeah, I was just wondering Aiden.
I went to,
Yeah.
Yeah, so. Not a municipal building for our employees.
Well, it was always supposed to be a temporary place,
Right.
and I remember that. It was never supposed to be the ultimate solution. It was always we're gonna go here until we figure out what to do. And I'd like to be able to actually figure out what to do about some of these things. Yeah, do you have more?
No, I just like to not restrict it to just town hall needs. I mean, we've already said that the police department would be considered, and that's not mentioned in the resolution, so a town space needs, not just town hall needs.
Okay. All right, is there any other discussion?
That's additional cost.
Yeah,
I take it.
I don't think that we need to include the rescue squad with it. I'd like to move past that point, but I've voiced my opinion about that. Others have as well. I don't think it's a bad idea to consider the fact that we are going to need to be an emergency operations location in the spatial needs analysis. I think that would be a smart idea. Okay. All right, I'm gonna do a roll call. Ms. Clement?
Aye.
Mr. Montier? Ms. Robertson? Aye. Dr. Sosella?
Aye.
Mr. Williams?
Aye.
And Mr. Allison?
Aye.
All right. Aye. Let's see what we need, and then let's scale it back. You're laughing. All right, resolution 2622. Application for cops hiring. What's the COPS stand for?
Stands for cops.
Oh.
Actually, this is working, yes. Hello, Madam Mayor, Honorable Council. So I'm here to present to you on the U.S. Department of Justice grant for cops hiring. It is of course, federal program. They offer about 150 grant awards throughout the country per round. Those vary from 1 to 4 officers, whatever the request is. I would like to amend the staff recommendation. We initially were going to propose pursuing 2 positions for police officers. The new staff recommendation is to pursue the grant for 1 additional police officer. And the main considerations for that are that we already have some vacancies that need to be filled, as well as additional positions that have already been approved by council. Therefore, to add 2 additional positions to that with the current recruiting situation and how that's been going, we think it's more prudent to pursue a more attainable amount this year. And if expansion needs to happen in the future, we can pursue the grant in the future as well. So the main information for the grant award, they offer a maximum of $125,000 to be paid over a 3-year period. And that covers up to 75% of salary and fringe for however many police officers are hired under the grant. That does not include equipment and training costs. As you'll see, all of you have before you might attempt to do math from earlier today. So if you see, it's 4 years because the program goes for 3 years where they give you funding, but in that 4th year, you have to fund all of the expenses 100% from town funds. So you are obligated to take on the obligation for another year. And the reason for that is the whole point of the program, cops hiring, is to increase the amount of officers at police departments across the country. So that's why they insist upon that additional budgetary obligation. The amendment on the floor to the resolution that requests, or I guess you could scrap the resolution and just do a motion, however you want to do it, if that's practical. So it would be to strike the SRO specific provisions because we did receive an additional 4th year under the SRO grant, even though it was initially only a 3-year program. For some reason, they're giving us a 4th. Okay, so to strike the SRO provisions is 1, and then 2 to change wherever it mentions 2 officers to 1 officer. So those are the only changes to the resolution that I would suggest. And as you can see from the breakdown, the total grant funding would be $125,000, it's matched for 1 officer. And then the town funds over the 4-year obligation would be, the town cost would be $153,000. I also just wanted to clarify that the police department will be pursuing this application. I won't really be involved in that process. And I will be instead pursuing a different grant to hire a civilian for the police department to be their sort of accreditation manager to work through that process. If you have any questions, I'm here, but that's all the information I have for you.
Yes, Mr. Montier.
So you're suggesting that we're using federal funds to supplement a position we've already budgeted anyway?
No, sir. Supplementation is strictly prohibited under this grant program. The goal is to expand the department beyond the already budgeted 4 positions.
Do we have funding for this position currently? Or do we have funding for this?
Currently, no. We do have funding for the positions that were budgeted. Chief Deaver brought up this COPS grant to myself and JC as an opportunity based on his plan and the vision for the department moving forward. If we were to be the recipient of the grant and council were to decide to accept the grant formally, then we would be looking to hire an additional cop to support the department moving forward. But that's something that we would have to do probably in the biennial budget process, simply because this could not go towards any of the positions that you just approved this fiscal year. So really, it's a discussion as it relates to the overall vision and direction for adding additional officers to the department. Chief Deaver also said that this specific position could also work on the accreditation work. We just found out about the accreditation manager grant yesterday, so we are going to be working kind of in tandem. So we would have some decisions to make if we were selected one way or the other.
So currently it's unfunded.
Correct. This could not apply to any budgeted positions that we have. So this would be an additional officer, and it would be unfunded at this point.
So it'd be additional funding.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I never started over that. It's too late for me to get started. I'm getting close to my bedtime. I don't want to get, but we adopted a budget last month, and now we're talking about adding expenditures before we get to the new budget. Okay. And I don't have any fundamental objection with this. I've jocularly made this suggestion in the past, but I really need to be unjocular at some point. That is, that JC is doing a fine job of pursuing these grants. And this one makes sense. There's no question about that. But I think we really need to watch how we're picking up these grants and the amount of local funds that we're looking to dedicate to these grants. And I'm a little concerned that we're not watching that we're really going to get out of whack on our budget.
That will be a consideration.
Those new microphones are just not cutting it. You got one, and they're problem, and she's got one, and they're problems with all 3 of them.
So yes, that would be a consideration, and as part of the new grant process, instead of doing this, just staff doing this administratively, we obviously wanted to bring this to you and show what the impact would be to the budget in the future, as there would be a funding match. I'll let Chief Deaver speak to why he wanted us to pursue this COPS grant and what that would do for his department in the future. If we were able to get this, obviously we would have to accept it and then make provisions for funding for future positions. So I'll turn it over to him at this point.
No, my concern with this is not free money. It's money that costs us something now. And we need to watch how many costs we're absorbing with these grants.
I still want to hear Chief Deaver's response. It's ultimately, I mean, you have a department budget. Is there a way that you can afford this within your department budget? Or is there a purchase that maybe you shouldn't make instead of getting an extra officer through this?
We've already identified a need this evening regarding parking and enforcement activities at the beachfront during the season. When Chief Miller was interim chief, he identified the department needed to be 18 to 22 sworn. As of today, we are 13 sworn, so we're drastically short of where we need to be with our summertime population of 10 to 12,000. So I'm looking for cost benefit savings to try to grow the department to get to the benchmark that we need. I realize that there is cost associated with this, but it is a 3-year funded, partially funded position that gives the town time to acquire the total cost of the FTE and fringe associated with the position. The largest cost to the town for this position would be a police vehicle outside of our 25%. The cost of the equipment and uniforms and body armor and so forth, I could absorb in my budget, but currently not a vehicle that would need to be associated with it.
Why does a big comp need a vehicle? Are there localities that share vehicles or leave one stationed?
Not any locally, no, ma'am. Some large cities
So
have
this
for patrol.
cost analysis just has the salary on it. It doesn't talk about the fact that you also would want a vehicle.
No, that's listed in that.
The second section, equipment and training under town funds, that 52 grand, that includes the vehicle cost
Oh, I see.
under year one. And I could just say that town staff is concerned with with town funds being used for these grants. That's why we put the breakdown here, so you can see that's how much of town municipal money we'll have to pay to make this happen. If it was a typical grant, I mean, that's not even 1-to-1. I'd say that's not a great grant deal. But if it's going to cost us 153,000 plus 125,000 for a position we're going to hire anyway, then it does become attractive. So.
I think the other concern is whether or not accreditation is a council priority moving forward, because that would take the precedent over this position in my mind if we were to move forward with one grant for their accreditation manager, which we would get 1 year funding for. So just so we're clear on what some of the cost differences would be in terms of a civilian versus a sworn officer and what the end goal is for the department long term. If the goal is to add more officers, then this would be one approach that we could look to save costs in the future for that to help the locality. Obviously, there are costs associated with it. But if the goal was accreditation, then we would probably be better served to focus on that position.
How many positions do we have funded right now?
13 full-time positions funded in the current.
And
fiscal year.
how many vacancies do we have?
0.
So this would bring us up to 14?
In July, we obtained new positions that council approved last month. So it would take us to,
So in July, we can recruit 2 more officers,
correct.
and this would be a third one on top of that?
Yes, ma'am.
If we go for the grant, when do we have to make this decision? I mean, what's the turnaround time on deciding whether, I'm just thinking another month from now, we may go, oh my gosh, we've got to have another officer.
For this behemoth of a grant program, I've never touched one like that. I think the date that was on there was something around October for announcements. I don't know when the award would come. For a giant program like this, if you want an answer within a month, I don't think you're going to have it.
No,
Or
what
in 2
I'm
months.
saying is,
Well, would it be
what
for this year
harm is
anyway?
being done by going for the grant if we don't have to make a decision until October?
Right, you could just reject the grant agreement if that was council's decision at that time. So this could buy you time to make a decision. And the other reason it's more prudent to try than not is because with these kind of major programs where there's people who've been applying for it for years, sometimes it's best to just get the line. And maybe we won't get it this year or next year, maybe the year after that, our chances will look better.
So you're not gonna pre-order a car because you're applied for the grant or anything like that, and it wouldn't add to our officers for the summer regardless, because we're not even talking about implementing until the following year.
Correct.
Well, that puts a little different perspective on things.
How much staff time is involved in applying for this? Has already, some of the legwork already been done, or?
There's been, I would estimate 10 to 15 man hours, personnel hours between Lieutenant Parsons, myself, and JC reviewing the solicitation report and starting the process for the justification narrative needed for the grant.
Okay, thank you.
For a grant of this size, I would say it's going to be probably a full work week, I would say. All 8 hours every day, 40 hours. So for one person, but for 3 people mixing that together, any combination.
Mhm. Okay. I was gonna say I would support the application process and then figure out if India could figure out where exactly this is gonna fit in our budget, because I have the same concern as Tom. But I do see the need for, more police officers, so I have mixed feelings. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, understand my cautionary note on all of this is making sure the town manager is keeping track of what JC's obligating us to, as he's doing entirely too fine a job at some point, okay?
He is doing a phenomenal job, but I do think there has to be some reality around when we talk about crime and enforcement and the implications of what that means on our budget long term. And then Mr. Miller did mention, and Mr. Miller is a great police chief. He did his own analysis an assessment of some other localities. I think that we should also be doing some benchmarking of some localities in addition to that to ensure that our benchmarking peers accurately reflect the number of officers that we need. And then there are also other options to look at a police auxiliary force, which I think is in our ordinance, and some things that we can do to look to help during peak seasons that don't necessarily mean additional full-time officers permanently.
I don't argue that with you, and to the extent we can shake down the feds for the money to make this happen, that's fine. As a result, I move that we go forward with the application.
Second.
All right. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Any opposed? Nope.
I have a question for the chief that's kind of pertaining to this. Have you had a chance to have further discussions with the Westmoreland County Sheriff's Department in supplementing boots on the ground during we are part of Westmoreland County. We pay taxes that cover the Sheriff's Department and all of their deputies, and having some extra boots on the ground when we need them for these extreme weekends, which we are pretty much the only locality in the county that has this kind of impact.
I have had several conversations with the county in the last 30 days regarding their assistance in town on certain details, certain activities, special event weekends, Potomac River Fest, specifically because we're working towards finalizing that plan for next weekend. But as well as day to day, I will also have asked them to include me in any enforcement action that they do that is separate and apart from anything that Floating Beach does. So we can have true statistics of what's occurring in our jurisdiction.
Because I think we've seen what Memorial Day can do, and I think other 3-day weekends such as the 4th of July, Juneteenth, Labor Day, all of these different periods of time when we know they're going to come rushing at us, to plan in advance to have 2 more officers here that are from the Sheriff's Department would have a significant impact on enforcement and the perception of our residents that their county taxes, they're actually getting some return on what their county taxes are going to pay for at the Sheriff's Department level.
I didn't even talk about the fact they're having the public hearing for the tax rate right now while we're in the middle of our meeting. Yep. Tonight at 6:00. And if you think your personal property tax is going up, then read the notice again. Okay, I appreciate that. I think we're gonna go into closed meeting now. Do I need to split these up, Tom? Or anybody else? I don't mean to just pick on Mr. Moncur, I apologize. Okay, I'm gonna make a motion to go into closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A1, evaluation performance for specific public officers, appointees, or employees of the town of Plain Beach, including the office of the town manager and possibly other departments. Pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A8, for consultation with legal counsel employed regarding specific matters requiring legal advice from counsel for disposition of 2 publicly held real properties involving actual or potential maintenance issues and utility easements. And pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A3, discussion of the disposition of 2 publicly held real properties involving actual potential maintenance issues and utility easements, where discussion in open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiation strategy of the public body.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all right. Close meeting.
I don't know how the heck we got out of here at 7:30 last time. Jeez.
We didn't have
That's like Twilight Zone stuff there.
session last time. And we didn't have a PowerPoint presentation.
Did I give you my agenda? Action to reconvene into open meeting. Do I have a motion? I think I gave you my.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Is there a motion to certify that only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and only such business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting were convened were heard, discussed, and considered in the meeting by council.
So moved. Second.
All right, each individually certified.
I so certify.
I so certify.
I so certify.
ISO certified.
So certified.
I so certify. Is there a motion to approve the amended town manager employment agreement and sign John Shaw as the official zoning?
Let's do two different motions on that.
Got it. Okay. First motion is to amend the town manager, approve the amended town manager employment agreement. Do I have a second?
Second.
Tom seconded because he was laughing. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Okay, we'll vote on that.
Aye.
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 Aye. And the second one is to approve John Shaw as the official, not interim, zoning administrator. And do you have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Aye.
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 Aye. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Wonderful. What did start that? Oh my goodness.
I don't even know how.
You are so lucky.